How does it feel to be called the best action director in the world at the moment, and the Mozart of mayhem, and being idolized by Hollywood directors, etc.?
I feel very happy, and also I'm very grateful to anyone who gave me great support. But I must say I'm not the best. I still learning. I still need to learn more, and I still need to learn from all the great filmmakers, and also I need to learn from the audience.
This charismatic fellow is John Woo, a legendary filmmaker.
What can I get you?
A trendsetter who helped spawn a new wave of crime action dramas in Hong Kong cinema, who brought along his own recognizable style of gun battle action that inspired several major action movie and video game franchises and cemented him as one of the greatest to ever do it. Woo started directing his first films primarily in the martial arts, comedy or wuxia genre, which were popular genres in Hong Kong cinema at the time, but John was more interested in doing dramas. After suffering from severe burnout, he decided to leave his production company he worked for, Golden Harvest, and went on to create his first crime drama movie. Strongly inspired by the late 60s film Story of a Discharged Prisoner, but also by Jean-Pierre Melville's work during the French New Wave movement during the 50s and 60s, John Woo released his big breakout hit A Better Tomorrow in 1986, which helped push a whole movement of crime drama action movies into Hong Kong cinema, which we called heroic bloodshed. Heroic bloodshed films are often about themes like loyalty, brotherhood or honor, and can, for example, involve anti-heroes like hitmen or triad members who have a score to settle with antagonists that betray that loyalty or code of ethics for their own selfish gain. You can have goodwood criminals who will happily blast their way through hundreds of gang members to bring their trial leader to justice who's even more morally corrupt than their own henchmen are. Or police detectives who are obsessed with a case they've been assigned to, who try anything to catch the mastermind they're chasing after, even after they have been long removed from the case or demoted because of a previous screw-up on their behalf. Because the detective already put so much work into the case, and the consequences of the criminal winning would be way too strong. A lot of John Woo's heroic bloodshed films of that era feature his almost trademark way of doing shootouts. And while I don't think John Woo ever came up with his own term for it, the ones we use are often thrown around are either gun kata, bullet ballet, but most prominently, gun fu. And judging from a recent Instagram post, I don't think John would have a problem with this term at all. Gun fu shootouts, at least John Woo's interpretation of them, are often chaotic and super stylish, and throw away all kinds of believability for cool points. This style obviously didn't come from nowhere. John spoke about how he was inspired by various musicals, but also Sam Peckinpah's work, especially with the 1969 movie The Wild Bunch. And as you will see, there are similarities with all the chaos that's on display, deliberate use of slow-mo for almost every death, explosions and very fast camera cuts. So in John Woo's shootouts, characters often use dual pistols, with John's favorite being the Berettas, but also spray down entire interiors with Uzis or shotguns, with seemingly endless magazine sizes. Debris and sparks fly around everywhere, interiors get torn into pieces, there's a ton of noise and muzzle flash on screen. Deaths are often bloody and very exaggerated, which are occasionally highlighted with the use of slow motion. The shooters themselves are extremely agile, and pull off evasion maneuvers like rolling, shoot diving, or getting the drop on several gang members by, I don't know, sliding down a staircase perhaps. That's where I think the term bullet ballet comes from, but you could also draw comparisons to martial arts, wuxia, or samurai films. While hand-to-hand or melee combat does happen, especially in other much later movie franchises inspired by Woo, the gunfights themselves don't always end in a quick exchange in bullets. Gun battles between key characters rather play out like a prolonged back and forth, similar to how martial arts duels or sword battles between two experienced fighters don't always end in an immediate knockout or one fatal strike. A lot of those characteristics are very well translated into the games inspired by this technique, but before I do a deep dive into those and also talk about what's coming for the next several years, I want to take a look at some of John Woo's most influential movies that helped set this blueprint, and do a bit of a breakdown of his action scenes and stories. While I think my explanation can suffice, I think it's also important so you can catch many of the game's references and homages to those films much later. And listen, I'm not a professional movie critic, but I got some good ass movies to recommend. Let's rewind back in time to the late 80s. This is where it all began. A Better Tomorrow is about a senior triad member named Sung Se-ho and his business partner but also best friend Mark Lee, who he has a long history with. Mark Lee is played by the iconic Hong Kong-born actor Chow Yun-Fat, who already became a familiar face in several soap operas or comedies, but with A Better Tomorrow being his big cinema debut, make sure to get used to his face. His charismatic nature and similar upbringing he and John-Woo had made him an almost inseparable duo for his future films. Sung Se-ho, or just Ho for short, also has a young brother called Kid, who at the beginning of the film is training to join the police force. Ho encourages his career choice and also plans himself to fully retire from his criminal work after one last deal. Ho and Mark travel to Taiwan and also bring along a new member of the triad called Chang. The deal however fell through and led to an ambush because the guy they were supposed to meet with were offered a good amount of money to take them out. The story overall is a crime drama about family, brotherhood, but also abuse of new gained power and betrayal, and also dealing with how much you can try to clean up your act and set a new path for tomorrow, but never being able to fully sever your ties to the criminal underworld, and seeing how badly it affects the ones close to you. I think its story is fantastic, and as serious as it is, it does however, probably unintentionally, come with its own goofy moments. Every time they do a close-up of a guy ominously staring, they play this one melody and it cracks me up every time. I really don't have much to complain about this film other than maybe how stupid and bullheaded Sung Se-ho's brother Kid is. Like I get it, you lost someone very close to you and want revenge, but come on! I feel like the classic John-Woo style shootouts and fights are still here in its infancy. They're fast, very bloody, and explosive, but still not as over the top as his later movies. The interiors that are falling apart, the ridiculously large magazine sizes and some effects do appear, although used sparingly, but it still makes for a pretty cool result. It's almost humorous how fast the first shootout unfolds. And the second one, where Mark Lee assassinates the guy who betrayed them at the deal, completely uses with style and bloodshed, and serves as the exception with its deliberate use of slow-mo. While A Better Tomorrow is a pretty great result, I still feel like John-Woo was trying to figure out how exactly to make them as bombastic as crazy as he really wants them to be. Regardless, its greatest moments are memorable, and it makes sense why it's considered such an important piece to Hong Kong movie history. It earned tons of award nominations and also won in the Best Film category for the Hong Kong Film Award of 1987, with Chow Yun-Fat also winning Best Actor, and it was a box office success. Also, if you ever saw this animation doing the rounds, it's based off of this movie. Before I move on to his next major hit, I just want to do a quick detour to the sequel which came out a year later. The sequel unfortunately is kind of incohesive and not as good. The narrative is kind of lackluster compared to the first one. It follows several different story arcs in which some just don't feel fully fleshed out or don't end in a satisfying way. If you thought Kid was bullheaded in the first film, just watch what stupid shit he pulls in this one. There were disagreements between John-Woo and the producer of the film, Choi Hak, about what the story should be focusing on, and it's very noticeable. A large part of the film takes place in New York, and you can tell the dialogue was written by people with limited knowledge of English. It makes for some pretty funny moments though.
This fucking fried rice stinks!
The fried rice scene alone is a real highlight.
I won't give you shit. You don't pay me, and I'll blow up your restaurant.
You really mean that? You want to blow up my restaurant? You want to blow up my restaurant? Shut up, you! Apologize to the rice right now!
Fuck your rice!
Fuck off!
you
Bullshit!
The action scenes are a step up from the predecessor, however. Most notably the one in the apartment complex and the finale in the mansion. The apartment shootout has Chow Yun-Fat blast his way through multiple goons with his Bass 12 and dual pistols.
Fuck you!
It's loud, brutal, makes a lot more use of slow motion, and has a cool moment where he takes out an adversary while sliding down a staircase. The finale is a near 10-minute chaotic bloodbath between the main crew and tons of gang members. It's explosive, features hand-to-hand and katana sections, and by the end the entire building looks like it's out of a horror scene. John Woo's trademark style of action really started to flesh itself out here. I think the action and Chow Yun-Fat's acting definitely carried this film. It sucks that the whole crime drama story in this one just kind of fell flat for me here. But fortunately, Chow Woo made for one hell of a return with his next project just 2 years later. The Killer. Not to be confused with David Fincher's recent The Killer, it's a strong evolution from John Woo's past work. Chow Yun-Fat returns and plays a hitman named Jeong who decides to wrap up one last job before he goes into retirement. After a shootout ensues, he finds a woman along the way named Jenny, a nightclub singer hopelessly trying to escape, who he tries to protect from the other gangsters. During the act, however, he fires his gun way too close to one of her eyes, leading her to go blind. He feels tremendous guilt for what he has caused and tries to protect her from that moment, and also manages to save her from a robbery attempt. While he did save her, she still puts a surprisingly amount of trust over a random guy she cannot see, offering to drive her home and even allowing him into her house. But things remain cool from here on out. We're also introduced to a detective called Lee, who got demoted from his current position after messing up an undercover job. The hitman went on to perform another contract to pay for the surgery that could fix Jenny's eyesight problem. He does get the target, but then gets backstabbed by the people he was hired by because the contractor wasn't gonna pay him the money for it. In the following shootout, a child that happens to be there also gets injured in the crossfire, which Jeong then brings to a nearby hospital. Lee happened to be at the scene of the assassination at the same time and has been trying to catch up to Jeong, all the way to the hospital where he witnesses the act of him trying to save the little girl. His intent is still to catch him and even use Jenny and the trials as bait, but finally drops the idea after he gets saved by him in an ambush. Detective Lee eventually realizes Jeong's good intentions for Jenny and helps him get the money he was promised for his last contract. The Killer might be, narratively, the strongest entry in his entire filmography, which is highly impressive considering, according to Woo, the entire film was shot without a script. But also the action of The Killer has its clear highlights, featuring the chaotic, loud gun battles near the end at the church, but my personal favorite being the one-on-one standoff between Jeong and Lee at Jenny's apartment.
我唔會怨你好耐嘅啫。
係啦，我斟茶俾你哋啊。
唔使啊，阿 Jenny，因住倒瀉，係因住六親啊。
The Killer wasn't a big financial success, but received high critical acclaim and international praise. It makes for a perfect blend of emotion and action. It's beautifully shot. Its soundtrack hits hard. It deserves all the praise it gets. John Woo brought his A-game when it comes to story in The Killer, but his next major hit was gonna go all out on action, and set the benchmark for all major gun fu films and games releasing decades later. I'm smiling from ear to ear just thinking about this one. Hard Boiled is an action cinema classic. A 2-hour grand epic finale to his early Hong Kong movie era. It's almost universally considered his best film. Almost all the lessons he learned from his last efforts shine brighter than ever here. It's bombastic, stylish, almost flawless, and probably inspired some of your favorite action flicks. It's in the top 3 action movie Hall of Fame at least, from how it's built and the influence it had. Starring Chow Yun-Fat again, this time as a police inspector who goes by the nickname Tequila. Not so subtle wordplay. The movie starts with him and his partner at the Teahouse trying to arrest a gang of gun smugglers doing a deal. The movie wastes no time at all. After just the first few minutes setting up the context, the first shootout already goes off, which rivals everything we've seen from Woo's past work. Many of the trademark elements are on full display. The Teahouse shoot, according to John, was also filmed without a script and came with noise complaints from nearby residents, but the police at the crew just continue filming anyway. The action sequences were all sort of by instinct. The opening action scene in the Teahouse, we shot that before we even had a story or script. The real location was going to be torn down in 2 weeks. The Teahouse was a memorable building. It was historic. Everyone in Hong Kong knew it, so I had to shoot it before they tore it down. We only shot at night, from around 5 in the afternoon until the next morning. About 12 hours or so. The stairway was near the street, so we got even more protests than usual from neighbors during these scenes. They would call the police and firemen, but fortunately, the cops were big fans of my movies and never did anything to stop us. You really cannot pay for this kind of respect. Keeping it brief, the story mainly follows the Inspector Tequila and undercover cop Alan, who is played by Tony Leung, a famous actor who you may recognize, just like the late Leslie Cheung, who played Kid in A Better Tomorrow 1 and 2, from his prominent appearances in several Wong Kar-wai films. Alan is working undercover for a certain triad boss named Uncle Hoi, who he goes on to betray for another triad boss named Johnny Wrong. Johnny also got a highly skilled killer with an eye patch working for him named the Mad Dog. The goal for both Alan and Tequila is to find out where Johnny's weapon cache is located and to find and arrest him, preferably. The narrative isn't as involved with serious drama like The Killer or Better Tomorrow 1, but works more than enough for the type of movie Hard Boiled is trying to be. It puts much more of an emphasis on the action rather than story. And boy, does the action go hard in this one. You can structure Hard Boiled into 3 key sections with scenes in between that move the plot forward into the next chapter. The previously mentioned Teahouse intro, then the warehouse section where the betrayal happens, a Mad Dog gets introduced, and the last leg of the film which is at Maple Hospital, which goes on for an hour, but I promise you, a lot in there happens. The warehouse isn't even the grand finale, but still has a lot of incredible scenes on its own. From the way the biker crew rolls in as a group which is beautifully shot, who start shooting on their way in, including the hottest way I've ever seen someone enter a shootout ever? Tell me that this ain't peak. The spectacle doesn't end there. Tequila swoops in, one-handing an MP5, taking out one guy after another, which unfolds into an intense battle between him and the rival gang, including the Mad Dog. Shit goes wild, and there's so many awesome moments during this fight. As I said again, this shit is peak. The last segment in the hospital is where Alan and Tequila try to find the weapons cache in the secret basement. It's about an hour long and there's a lot that happens. Johnny has long figured out that Alan is a cop and has tried to double cross him. After leaving the basement, the duo stylishly stealthed their way back into the upper hospital floors. Clear the rooms for patients and even babies are getting evacuated, which all culminates into the infamous 3-minute firefight, which is shot all in one take. This is the one standout scene everybody will mention, which feels like a first-hand experience while the duo does their work. Getting the right take on something that has to be this meticulously choreographed, not messing up any of your lines, and the set crew having to clean up the entire floor in not even a minute, once the actors step out of the elevator and continue on, must have been hell. The final battle against the Mad Dog also gets pretty insane, and is in my opinion peak John Woo style gone through, and demonstrates the martial arts or sword fight analogy I was trying to make in the best possible way. I think I can leave it at that. I think the movie is a masterpiece and everyone involved has brought their A-game to it.
I remember the scene, the shot where Chow Yun-Fat was holding the baby and he was running away from the explosion. The first take, John didn't like them because, the explosion is too far behind. And so for the next take, he said, let me push the button. And before Chow Yun-Fat was ready, he pushed the button and Chow was really scared and he was actually running for his life in that shot. But even though after the shot he went up to the DP and to John and said how does it look? Does it look real and so forth? And he's really professional. But then he turns around and said, "That motherfucker."
Anyway, it cannot be stressed enough how much Jean Woo's work in this film especially has set the blueprint for so many gun-fu, gun-kata, bullet ballet, whatever you wanna call it, video games and movies years and decades down the line. The new wave of heroic bloodshed films it helped set in motion, but also western films like The Matrix or Equilibrium that feature a more quick and cool-headed approach to gun-fu with a heavy emphasis on superhuman precision. Extraction 1 and 2, or the Indonesian The Raid 1 and 2, which feature hand-to-hand combat much more prominently, the Finnish World War II action movie Sisu, which released earlier this year, and of course, we cannot forget, the entire John Wick series. The most beloved and probably most successful action movie franchise that's currently out right now. After Hard Boiled, Jung-woo went on to do movies for Hollywood with mixed results, with movies like Face-Off or Hard Target being strong, confident entries into the American market, but also some real duds like Mission Impossible 2, which is for many considered the worst entry of the franchise, the less than stellar Wind Talkers, or the movie he did for Netflix called Manhunt, which wasn't too well received either. But currently he's gearing up for the release of his next film, Silent Night, in December, in collaboration with John Wick's production company Lionsgate. It's been getting positive reviews as of now from the press, so maybe we can celebrate it as his grand return, maybe not. By the time this video is uploaded, the statement will either age gracefully or terribly. He's also working on a Hollywood remake of his film The Killer, which of course will set super high expectations. Now that was a pretty long deep dive into some of Chan-woo's most important films, but I think it was necessary to really highlight the influence those movies had on a lot of the games I'm about to talk about, starting with none other than the most successful video game trilogy to represent Woo's style out of them all.
They were all dead. The final gunshot was an exclamation mark to everything that had led to this point. I released my finger from the trigger, and then it was over.
Max Payne is probably one of the first and closest homages to noir detective thrillers and John Woo gun-fu heroic bloodshed films. I mean, it's not too subtle about it. While one of the difficulties being titled Hard Boiled can be up for debate, the name dropping in the actual story is as clear as day.
Cogniti bailed. I made like Chow Yun-Fat.
Not so fast. The password. John Woo.
Come on. Okay, John Woo.
All right. Come right in.
It's a trap! It's Payne!
Developed by Remedy from 1996 to 2001 and produced by 3D Realms, Max Payne takes place in New York City, where Max, a DEA agent, suffers the tragic loss of his wife and baby after a couple of home invaders with weapons barged into his house and killed them both. This shit gets tragic right off the jump. The home invaders were under the influence of a drug called Valkyr, which leads Max to track down the guys who were trafficking the drug. At the subway station near the beginning, his former colleague gets shot and killed by an unknown assassin, which leads to Max being framed for the murder, which now makes him not only a target for the mobsters but also the police. Despite the case being officially dropped from Max, he continues to track down the people peddling Valkyr and find out its origins, which later reveals to be something much bigger and more twisted than he initially anticipated. The story is told in comic panels, similar to a graphic novel, which were a creative and money-saving solution on otherwise real-time cutscenes and became iconic with the series. A lot of the actors portraying characters in those panels were just staff members from Remedy or family and friends Sam Lake was close to. The panels themselves were made by taking photos and putting a watercolor filter over it. Sam Lake, who was the writer for Max Payne, recalls the following. The janitor in that house where I was living ended up being the mob boss. My mother ended up being the main bad guy, Nicole Horn. Holy crap, he shot his own mom. My dad is the shady government official Alfred Woden. And my brother was Vinnie Cogniti, the mobster. In the first game, Max Payne was Sam Lake's self-insert. This dumb looking expression, which makes every tragic scene look hilarious in hindsight, became iconic because of its look. Max seems like he's constipated or ate too many Sour Patches. But that's why we all love it anyway.
Narrow your mouth. Lift your cheeks up, squint your eyes, arch your eyebrows.
The voice acting for Max, however, was handled by James McCaffrey, a highly talented actor who provided his voice to Remedy's strong poetic and humorous writing, which created an inseparable duo which really nailed down the noir flair and probably gave us some of the best quotes in the entire history of gaming.
After Y2K, the end of the world had become a cliche. But who was I to talk? A brooding underdog avenger alone against an empire of evil, out to right a grave injustice. Everything was subjective. There were only personal apocalypses. Nothing is a cliche when it's happening to you. He knew where his boss was, and I wanted to square things up with Jack Lupino. Cogniti would be moving fast. I don't know about angels, but it's fear that gives men wings.
Pleased to meet you. I'm Frankie the Bat Niagara.
Niagara, as in you cry a lot? He had a baseball bat and I was tied to a chair. Pissing him off was the smart thing to do. There was something disturbingly familiar about the letter before me. The handwriting was all pretty curves.
You're in a computer game, Max.
The truth was a burning green crack through my brain, weapon statistics hanging in the air glimpsed out of the corner of my eye, endless repetition of the act of shooting, time slowing down to show off my moves, the paranoid feel of someone controlling my every step. I was in a computer game. Funny as hell, it was the most horrible thing I could think of.
Max.
Turn the game console off right now.
James McCaffrey was one of the best to ever do it, and him and his work would never be forgotten. The news that he passed away from cancer came out of nowhere and hits like a punch to the gut. And it kind of sometimes doesn't even feel real even thinking about it. Rest in peace, James. It fucking sucks having to see you pass away this early. Many of Remedy's classic story traits originated here. The weird TV shows that regularly appear that you feel have to be some kind of metaphor for your character or story, the inner monologues, the overall weirdness and mindfuck the games put you through, and having all of that presented so competently after only their second game is something pretty rare to witness, especially when their first game was a top-down weaponized rally racer from 1996. The gameplay resembles the John Woo style gunplay pretty closely. The game lets you play with a strong variety of weapons over time you can all carry at once, from single or dual wield pistols, SMGs, pump action and sawed-off shotguns, ARs, snipers or grenade launchers. There's no dedicated aim button other than for snipers. Instead you're given a bullet time meter, which is a replacement feature that slows down time in order to better hit your shots. You can activate it by itself or in combination with the shoot dodge, an evasive dive where you take out goons in slow-mo until you land on the ground, in which you can 360 rotate in. During bullet time, the game doesn't use hit scan anymore and bullets have actual travel time, which helps with dodging them. The idea sounds ridiculous, but it's fun as hell to use. Constant movement is a high priority. Luckily its controls are super responsive. Third-person shooters today usually struggle with feeling direct in its movement, but it's a non-issue here. Playing it you can tell it was made for PC first, without having to look up the release dates. There's also rolling, an evasive maneuver if you don't want to waste bullet time, but it won't let you shoot in that process, so it cannot save you every time. The game is rather unforgiving, so listening to random next door conversations can be useful, but also making use of third-person exploits like corner peeking. In total, this creates a flow of gameplay that translates John Woo's action from the big screen to your home computer extremely well. And its bullet time implementation became highly influential for many later third-person and first-person shooters that brought in their own slow-mo mechanic. From a pure influence standpoint, Max Payne might be the video game hard-boiled, but I'll expand on that take much later.
Yo!
In a Game Informer interview in 2016, Sam Lake stated, "We were all watching a lot of Hong Kong action movies, like John Woo stuff, and we were saying, we should do something like that. All of those cool slow-mo bullet time things. We need to find a way to bring some of that coolness into the gameplay." The gameplay also gets compared to The Matrix, understandably. Sometimes it's claimed that it was an inspiration for this game, which isn't true and entirely coincidental. The movie may have released 2 years prior to Max Payne, however according to Sam, The Matrix in many ways was, I feel, a big stroke of luck for us in the sense that Hong Kong action theater, from the Western perspective, was still a relatively little known, kind of a niche thing. Matrix really brought that kind of stylization and coolness into action. It was huge, and it came nicely before us, setting up a perfect launch platform for Max Payne to come out. Here's a fun fact, however. Back in 2001 there was a 3D Mark demo that showed the state of possible computer graphics at the time, including a CG-rendered recreation of the Matrix lobby scene. What was the tech they used to build it? MaxFX technology, provided by Remedy, the same one they used for Max Payne. Small word, ain't it? Now, as great as its gameplay foundation is, it unfortunately comes with its own set of serious issues. As it's probably expected from someone's first ever third-person shooter from a small studio with a short budget in 2001.
Why even show the bullet if you knew it was gonna miss? I just see like half an unloaded map.
The AI is super unfair. They have insane reaction times. You will have to save scum a lot to get through your first run. Even on the easiest difficulty, which is actually an adaptive difficulty. Fugitive has like 7 different stat presets that change many aspects like enemy health, consumables and ammo, health regeneration and bullet time gained per kill, depending on how often you die in a certain time span. But those deaths only count if you don't immediately reload your last quick save by spamming F9. I struggled less playing on hard boiled, the harder difficulty, than I did with the one supposed to tailor to your skills. The shoot dodge is also great to avoid gunfire until it ends. If you didn't get everybody by the time you're on the ground, Max will always try to stand up by himself automatically, which makes him totally vulnerable for almost a second. Which is not a lot, but it is a lot in a game where quick reactions and precision are everything. You only die in what feels like 5 bullets. Health has to be manually regenerated by finding painkillers, so it's not just a dumb gun-fu fantasy where you feel like an unstoppable action hero. It asks you to make use of those mechanics wisely. It's a design decision I respect, but the lack of polish in some aspects can really hold it back. Also, some of the guns, like the pump action shotgun or even a 50 caliber deagle, really suck for some reason.
Hey,
The occasional platforming sections aren't fun, the AI can still be easily cheesed at times.
Hey!
Part 3 has too many lasers and oh my god, the nightmare sections. So the game has those nightmare sequences where Max relives a twisted version of his darkest memories. Now visually, even today they are gorgeous and create a seriously haunting atmosphere. And it makes me wonder how Remedy will transform them into modern visuals once the remakes come out. They got a decent resume when it comes to horror now. And there's also so much you could expand on here after over 20 years. However, those sections where you need to follow some kind of blood trail or umbilical cord that I always fell down from, I don't want to experience those again. I had to save scum until the F5 key almost broke, till I got those right. You know what, fuck that baby. Despite these issues, the praise for Max Payne isn't undeserved. What this game achieved considering its time, the studio's resources and experience, is remarkable, and I've seen much worse from other big name studios' first or second ever attempt at a video game. I'm pretty sensitive to Chang, but Max Payne gets enough elements right for me to occasionally come back anyway.
Yo!
Getting this game to run properly did require a patch with some essential fixes for widescreen, random bugs, but also sound, because running this game unmodified would sound like this. The game is a strong graphical showing for 2001, and I can imagine many people's PCs were brought down to their knees at the time. What it conveys extremely well is that suffocating atmosphere of nighttime Wooden New York in its worst, most crime-infested neighborhoods. Whatever Remedy is gonna do for the remakes to showcase this vibe is gonna be beautiful. They usually seem to knock it out of the park in the graphics department. Now if you're feeling really pedantic about the term gun fu and want the fu more seriously represented, me and many others in the community can recommend Kenneth Young's Kung Fu mod for you. A gameplay overhaul mod which adds a ton more moves to the melee combat and extreme ragdolls alongside it. Like hundreds of different animations were made for this mod over the years it was worked on, according to the developer. This is probably the best mod you could get if you want Max Payne to feel more like a martial arts movie, or like Matrix. But there's also more unlockable moves and upgrades via a leveling system. It might be the biggest and best known mod the game has and makes second playthroughs entirely worth it. The mod was so popular within the community that he got his legacy firmly cemented in the form of a poster in Max Payne 2. Pretty neat.
Does he look the part to you?
He looks exactly like I always imagined Casey to be.
Max Payne 2, The Fall of Max Payne, is in many ways a strong mechanical and visual upgrade from the first one. It's a lot less of an effort to set up on your PC first of all. It has a higher production value. Sam Lake's iconic grin got replaced with a Timothy Gibbs lookalike that can actually move his face. Aside from the comic book panels that return and look better than ever, there's also real-time cutscenes now. The graphics look amazing for 2003. Interiors have a lot more details in them and textures are rendered at a surprisingly high resolution. But here's what changed for gameplay. Many of Max's old moves return. The shoot dodge goes a little higher now and allows you to jump over some obstacles. You can slightly move to the left or right side mid-air in case something might be in your way, even if it makes no sense whatsoever, but hey, it's useful. After a shoot dive, Max now only gets up after you stop shooting. Not quite the best fix, but it's getting there. Bullet time is a lot more powerful than in the first one. For starters, it makes you move much quicker than before, almost like moving in real time. Thus, it's also much easier to replenish bullet time by getting kills during slow-mo. Reloading is almost in an instant, with your character doing a quick ballerina spin to reload their gun. Another much needed extra addition is having a dedicated throwables button. It never made any sense to me how grenades or molotovs had to be switched and thrown on its own in the first game. But now you can toss a quick grenade and get right back to shooting, which seriously improves the flow of combat. The evasive roll you can do also now knocks people over, which makes the first game more similar to Metal Gear Solid than I anticipated it to be. They also let you play with the entire gun arsenal more often. Rather than slowly accumulating every gun you find in a game over the course of the story, you find most of them really quickly, but with a new part of the story giving you an excuse to why your arsenal is being reset to almost zero again. Enemies also feel less like a bullet sponge and seem to stagger more often. They also got a new ragdoll system powered by Havoc, which is very exaggerated but makes for some seriously funny kills. I think Max Payne 2 is genuinely a strong improvement and a lot of the jank has been worked out. However, it is kind of easy now. Shoe dodges don't deplete any bullet time anymore, which makes no sense because you'll have plenty of it most of the time anyway. I think also the bullets remain in hit scan and don't have any bullet time anymore in slow-mo, but I feel like that was a conscious decision to balance things out. I'm not really a fan of those changes, but I'd rather take kind of easy than stupidly unfair. A common criticism for Max Payne 2 is that it's too short, which, yeah, it definitely is. You're done with the story in about 5 hours. Also, in some chapters, moments of combat are way too spread out. The apartment sections, I'm talking about the rundown apartments, had a lot of random walking and looking for the next room before another 5-second shootout happened. On the flip side, however, there aren't as many outside open-ended levels like in the first game and also a lot less lasers. So I'd still prefer going through this game than 1. Max Payne 2 is a love story between him and Mona Sachs, the femme fatale we shortly met and drugged us in the first game, that also becomes a playable character. Max works yet again as a detective for the NYPD to investigate a series of murders conducted by a killer group named the Cleaners. Mona Sachs is also wanted for another murder and gets arrested until those cleaners swoop into a police station looking for her, which gives her time to escape. The police and Max's colleague, Detective Winterson, keep looking for her, while Max himself actually stays together with Mona in secret, while they figure out who was responsible for the attacks and take out the leader of the cleaner once and for all. This is far from a deep analysis of the story, which can be a little complicated on your first playthrough. It also has a lot more missable plot details and conversations than there was in the first game. The police station in particular is packed with optional but entertaining dialogue and things to interact with.
He's my ex, really, but now the sicko's threatening to kill me. That's a crime, right? He's been playing those video games an awful lot. Makes him a very good shooter. Holding that controller's like holding a gun, they say in the news. You gotta help me. I fear for my life.
It's too much to ask for some privacy. I'll be out when it's done.
Okay, now I get it. Your wife and the pizza guy deviously conspired to set you up. They kill themselves in your bed with your gun, proceed to chop each other to pieces in your bathtub with your chainsaw, and finally lure you to the backyard where they patiently wait under the rose bush to inject you with V, and when you are helpless, they leak blood all over you and call the police. Anything to add?
They put in a lot of effort into making the station as natural and believable as possible. I think I explored the area for like 10 minutes, even though you could be done with the level in about 2 or 3. Finishing the story unlocks a much needed chapter select to directly jump into any action from the story you want to, which means that you don't have to rely on the limited amount of slave slots you were given. It also unlocks the Dead Man Walking mode, a time-based survival mode where the gameplay loop goes completely insane with constant spawning enemies and countless weapons to make use of. If you just wanna hop into some mindless fast gun for action to stimulate your brain, this might be the mode. Alright, so what mods can I recommend again? The first person mod for Max Payne 2 puts all of the gun for action right in front of your face. It works decent for what I think is essentially a change in camera perspective. So of course sometimes you can see Max inner skull peek through the screen. It also makes the platforming a lot more bearable. Almost like a dollar store Mirror's Edge successor, it puts a lot more emphasis on gunplay. Man, I miss Mirror's Edge. There's also an alternative called Shepard FPS, which improves on the first person animations a little, increases the blood splatter, adds in a comical death sound, and a couple new weapons like C4 and twin Glocks with silencers strapped onto them. You cannot get any cooler than this. They're also insanely overpowered. If you're in for a really cool homage to the old John Woo films, there's the Chow Yun-Fat edition, which adds him as a character with various outfit styles from A Better Tomorrow 2, The Killer, Replacement Killers, and of course Hard Boiled. Also adding a bunch of guns that made their appearance in those films, including their sounds. It also adds a bonus chapter to the Dead Man Walking mode, the church shootout near the end of The Killer, which is seriously some of the coolest shit I've ever seen. Last but definitely not least is PAYNE Evolution, which is the biggest out of the bunch. A complete rework of Max Payne 2's combat to be more in line with Max Payne 3's, including changes to the HUD, a lot more extra stories and missions, but some of them are admittedly much better than others, and also a ton of extra Deadman walking levels with many different characters, with different iterations of Max, Mona, and even Keanu Reeves appearing as either John Wick or Neo from The Matrix with its own custom level, the lobby from The Matrix, which is hard as hell. Max Payne 2 overall is my favorite in the series. It may be pretty short, but has the most enjoyable gameplay for me. It's easy to set up on modern systems and overall it just holds up surprisingly well. I wasn't as into the story as I was in the first game admittedly, but I'm glad they finally gave Max a not so tragic ending. He was finally able to deal with the losses he had to deal with and move on from the past. Yeah, of course it ain't over. So here's the deal about Max Payne 3. Remedy sold the rights to the IP to Take-Two back in 2002, so they had to abandon the franchise after finishing off the second game with Rockstar. Max Payne 3 was confirmed to be in development in 2009 just by Rockstar themselves, planned to release that same year. That didn't happen. A very troubled development cycle caused the game to be delayed by almost 4 years. Regardless, in May 2012 we finally got the game. And was it worth the wait? Max Payne 3 wasn't actually much of a success for Rockstar. It pushed 4.5 million units after launch, but with a $100 million budget. Most people look at it more fondly and tell you how underrated it is, but asking die-hard fans of the series, you might get some dissenting opinions. First off, the game continues 9 years after the events of the second game. We see Max in his apartment, in a deteriorating mental state, and suffering from a serious alcohol addiction. Still unable to move on from the tragic loss of his wife and daughter from the first game. And from there, things already sound kind of off. I thought Max was starting to learn how to deal with the loss of his family and his love interest Mona in the second game. How the hell did he end up in this pit? I think this would be fine if Max Payne 3 was actually Max Payne 2 and the actual second game never existed. But Max Payne 3 acknowledges the fall of Max Payne. Barely.
By now she'd been dead longer than I knew her. I still hadn't really forgiven myself for the Mona business. But I knew that was just grief. The insanity that comes with losing the life you had built.
An unforgettable place to stay.
I must be losing it.
Max is also a lot more cynical and vulgar now, which was a conscious decision. Sam Hauser, one of the writers, stated, "We're starting a new chapter of Max's life with this game. This is Max as we've never seen him before. A few years older, more word-weary and cynical than ever. We experienced a downward spiral of his life after the events of Max Payne 2 and witnessed his last chance for salvation." Another change that some people also had a problem with was the new setting. The game primarily takes place in Sao Paulo, Brazil, which is a radical shift from the old nighttime classic New York noir. To me personally, I understand that people might miss the old New York noir feel of the first two, but if I had to endure myself through that suffocating place a third time, I'd go slightly crazy. But to make up for it, the game brings in the occasional flashback chapters in nighttime Hoboken in New Jersey, which display how Max met with Pasos and why he had to flee from New Jersey. No matter if it's the more vibrant Sao Paulo favelas or the cold concrete walls of the Bronx, at the end of the day Max still fights his way through the dirtiest, grimiest ghettos these places can represent. The game is mechanically more grounded than the first two. For starters, Max cannot carry every weapon he finds anymore. You're now limited to just 3 weapons. 2 single-handed ones and a heavy one like an assault rifle, shotgun, or hell even a grenade launcher if you happen to find one. The way they solved this animation-wise is actually pretty clever. Since Max doesn't have a holster for his larger two-handed weapon, he just holds it on his left arm while holding the smaller one-handed weapons with the right hand, instead of it just disappearing into thin air. You can choose to dual wield any single-handed weapons you find and combine them in any kind of way, however since you don't have a third arm, you automatically drop your heavier weapon. The gunplay is the best in the entire series. Bullet time or not, bullets are rendered as actual projectiles like in the first game. The gun sounds have more of a punch to them and sound stronger than before. Max is more accurate than ever, which makes mid-distance or large-distance headshots an easy feat if you're accurate enough, even with pistols. This all gets accentuated by how realistically NPCs react to your gunshots and the place you're hitting them at. An enemy with a body vest or protective knee pads, either light or heavy, will survive a couple bullets or pellets, maybe fall to the ground from a barrage of them, but not necessarily die instantly. Some UFE troops you'll encounter later in the game will wear a helmet that has to be shot off before you can get a clean headshot. Enemies can also cry for pain and hold on to gunshot wounds, maybe even try to take you out while on last stand. It's all a part of Rockstar's Euphoria ragdoll physics that they implemented within their proprietary Rage engine, which started with GTA 4. It's incredibly impressive, still beats out a lot of other modern shooters in that department, and further drives home the impact your guns actually have. Of course, Max himself is also affected by this. You can actually mess up a shoot dodge now by realistically bumping into objects, and every time that happens you just feel like an idiot. But it can also lead to accidentally cool shit like this. Also, they finally figured out a way to implement the end of a shoot dodge correctly. Max now only stands up once you yourself try to move in any kind of way. It only took us 11 years. While standing up, which probably also depends on the gun, you can continue to shoot, which doesn't render you as entirely vulnerable anymore during that crucial second where it happens. You can now go into cover. Granted, Max Payne should never be played like a standard cover shooter, but there will be instances, especially on hard, where you need to get behind a wall and take out some guys from a safer distance until you recharge some adrenaline. You shouldn't stay behind cover forever, the AI will circle around and try to flank you, which can be pretty scary. It feels a lot like a desperate, last resort type of mechanic where the developer still communicates you have to move forward eventually. Especially since a lot of the cover is destructible. It happens often in the office level or in the favelas. If you still need to reduce your hitbox while maintaining a lot of the movement control, you can also just manually hide behind objects, sometimes while crouching. I know only an insane person would play a gun-fu shooter like this, until you realize your gun shoots where your crosshair is at, which allows for some serious cover cheesing. Some other minor additions. Max will also try to perform melee takedowns with whatever gun you're holding as a finisher, usually when you try to fire from real up close, and they're pretty cool. And lastly, you can shoot away grenades now. They're highlighted to hint at the fact that you can do it. But for some reason, Max himself cannot throw any grenades, but you can in multiplayer. Come up with a reason why this makes sense. Some throwables would have been super useful at times. But this and several other minor but important changes come together as a highly detailed, believable and in-depth combat system. Geronimo Barrera, that's a cool name, who was the vice president of product for Rockstar at the time, spoke about this in an interview. Our goal is to deliver the kind of fluid control that first-person shooters are known for, but without sacrificing any of the advantages of third-person games. We focused on making the shooting as flawless and fluid as we possibly could, then used advancements in physics and animation systems to ensure that Max's movement would not only allow for a great range of motion, but ensure that Max looked as believable as we possibly could while doing so. We're putting the player in control of the reticle first and foremost, with Max's movement and animation following the player's intended line of sight in any situation. Max Payne 3 does a much better job of walking this line than many other third-person shooters do, with thousands of animations being incorporated to achieve this goal. But there's still a real problem that comes with this new direction. Max feels slower than ever. While Max in the older games stayed as soon as you press the key, in this game there's often a little bit of a wind-up for the animations he has to pull off here. Sure, rotating your character in a shoot dodge in slow-mo as fast as you can turn your mouse may look video gamey as hell, but who cares honestly? There were instances where I fell into last stand and had to wait seconds until Max finally turned around to get the guy who tried to kill him. And as mentioned before, ragdolling after a messed up shoot dodge looks believable, but can be annoying as hell, especially when your character doesn't jump to where you pointed him at. I even got stuck on something once. Thanks, Euphoria. Max Payne 1 and 2's levels were often a bit more wide to accommodate for the quick movement, and in a few instances allow for possible flanking routes. People say Max feels slower since he's showing his age, but it's kinda weird since physically he's slowing down, but he's still showing insane reaction times and the sharpest aim in the entire series, while under regular alcoholic influence. Is this supposed to tell me he's becoming a cranky old man? Listen, I'm just a very gameplay first type of person. Usually a bad story and characters can be muted or skipped, but bad gameplay has to be wrestled with. But since I was talking about skipping storylines, let's talk about the game's structure. This game is very linear, it almost wants to be a movie. Here's your average chapter progression in Max Payne 3. A cutscene, sometimes in-game, sometimes pre-rendered at 30 frames with no anti-aliasing which only looks off on PC. Gun battle ensues. Gun battle ends. Max interacts with something like opening a door, oh it's a cutscene. He observes the environment and goes somewhere into cover where I would have never hid myself, and sometimes whips out his one-handed gun that I didn't even use. Gun battle ensues. Some of these cutscenes cannot be skipped, which really hurts score attacks, New York Minute or repeated story playthroughs. I could play this on the most current PC build you could get on the market and the game will still tell me a level has to load. Sure. I mean, the scenes are well directed, acted, and they even pay homage to the classic comic panels in it, and some of its transitions are genius. But if I just want to play the game, I cannot bring myself to finish certain chapters. But okay, enough with the whining. As much as I'm personally not a fan of this grounded direction in gameplay, their commitment to it is astounding. I did have to fight with the lack of super tight responsiveness like there was in the first two, but I will say this. I can't think of another single-player third-person action shooter that had me pay this much attention to enemy chatter, reticle placement, player positioning, appropriate strafing, smart use of bullet time, and keenly observing the environment from where a shooter could come from, especially when played on hard. Cause if you're playing carelessly, you'll be out in almost an instant. It's best implemented in the favela levels, where the vegetation, elevation, gang members that sometimes blend in, and somewhat confusing layout really drive home the fact that this ain't home turf for Max, thus also the player, and for the franchise in general. The game just really doesn't allow for dumb mistakes, and I respect that a lot. I clearly understand why people rate this game so highly, there's not much like it. I just prefer Remedy's approach to the series. If you're asking for mod recommendations, I don't know, first person? It translates surprisingly well and alleviated some of my control problems a little bit. Or what about a modern rendition of classic Max? You know, the one with Sam Lake's face? Or hell, maybe John Wick? I don't know, the game never got any proper mod support. It's safe to say Max Payne is never getting a fourth entry, with how the third one finally wraps everything up, and the game not being a strong financial success. Rockstar has all the reason to invest in the other franchises they own, like you know, GTA? Or maybe GTA? No, but honestly, if I had to choose between GTA 6 or Max Payne 4, I would obviously go with GTA 6, and most people would do as well. It's not like the Max Payne IP is completely dead in the water. F.E.A.R. is a horror shooter developed by Monolith Productions. You play as the Point Man, the newest recruit with superhuman abilities who helps fight along a unit called First Encounter Assault Recon, or in short, F.E.A.R. The unit F.E.A.R. is tasked to handle supernatural paranormal threats, and our job is to catch a rogue operative named Paxton Fettel right at the start of the game. He gets the drop on us however, I mean else the game would be finished in 10 minutes. Sure, okay. Fettel also controls an enemy unit called Replicas, which are telepathically controlled clone soldiers developed by the ATC, or Armored Chain Technology Corporation, which fronts as an aerospace manufacturer and medical research company, interesting mix, but actually do all of this Clone War shit behind the scenes. The plot goes even more insane from here. There's also a little girl called Alma, who is easily the most recognizable aspect about the series, as she will be the first thing you see on every single cover of the franchise, but also because she's the little witch that will haunt you via hallucinations, flashbacks, or other interesting ways to mess with you. F.E.A.R. alternates between a gun-fu shooter with tactical elements and psychological horror on a regular basis. While the game isn't the cream of the crop of nightmare fuel and sleepless nights, even for a bitch like me that avoids most horror games, there were clever moments the game got me in a way full-blown horror games didn't. Horror sequences range from a quick PNG pop-up to using shadowy figures such as Pass Along, which maybe got me the first 1 or 2 times but then got old pretty fast, to the more clever stuff where you get transported to a different twisted environment, the one in the vents, or that 1-2 punch at the ladder. If you've played it, you know which one I mean. F.E.A.R. goes in a bit slower direction than other Wu-inspired shooters do. Things like dual pistols, slow-mo, amazing looking destruction for its time, tons of blood and even an impressive gore system are all implemented. There's also different forms of melee, like jumping and hitting the button lets you dropkick someone, hitting crouch and melee at the same time turns into a slide kick. The AI is some of the smartest you'll probably see in any first-person shooter. It's not like Giga Brain or anything, but it's miles ahead for what you usually see in other shooters. While the game should be played on hard to properly witness it, because somehow even on medium they don't pose a challenge, the replicas will sometimes make advancements or pull other moves that will catch you off guard. Multiple units sometimes flanking from different routes, injured or solo squad mates retreating from the battlefield. Grenades being thrown to flush you out of cover. AI detecting your flashlight or throwing over a table for cover.
Flashlight.
The replicas often announce their next plan or press their current physical or mental state via comms, so you get a better idea of what's going on in the battlefield. The callouts also help you sell the idea of a squad properly communicating with each other, even if they don't really talk to one another. Despite its tactical elements, John Woo's influence on the shooter clearly shines through. I would recommend medium if you want to feel like an action hero, hard or extreme if you want to make the most out of the tools you were given. Craig Hubbard, the lead designer behind F.E.A.R, stated, "I was a huge fan of Hong Kong action movies and really wanted to capture the chaotic intensity of a John Woo or Ringo Lam shootout, so we started prototyping with that objective in mind. It became obvious pretty quickly that we were onto something. We made it a priority. We knew how we wanted combat to look and feel, a key reference was the Teahouse scene from Hard Boiled. So it was largely a matter of experimenting and iterating to see what was actually doable in terms of performance. That meant focusing on weapons, AI, combat spaces, effects and so on from the earliest phase of the project, all the way to the end and not wasting resources on features that didn't serve the essential experience. F.E.A.R is a very unique shooter that blends an unusual combination of ideas with a successful execution. There's not many games like it, like every game I'm about to talk about, but it's one of the gems from the golden era of PC gaming, which not even one of the sequels wanted to replicate. You might be thinking, man, they don't make games like these no more. If there only was a faithful sequel to this title or something similar in that vein. Well, I can provide you with a few options. Trepang 2 is the closest spiritual successor you'll get currently. It feels more like F.E.A.R 1 than its actual F.E.A.R sequels are. Sea cucumbers don't play a huge part in this game, and there also never was a Sea Cucumber 1, sorry to disappoint. Trepang 2 mostly uses the horror elements and AI behavior as an inspiration, but in gameplay it's much faster than F.E.A.R. You can dual wield more weapons in this game, including the Spaz 12, which features the hardest pump action animation of probably all time. You run fast, can slide pretty far and also use it to knock people over, super useful against soldiers with riot shields. And it also has some Crysis-inspired features like an instant cloak, which allows for stealth in some sequences, and you can grab people from behind, killing them instantly or priming them with a grenade, which in combination with its sound design and gore makes it my favorite feature in this game. Destruction can be plentiful and looks better of course in slow-mo. Every gunfight is supposed to look like a complete mess and it gets that across super well. I do wish gun variety was a little stronger. It feels like for the overwhelming majority you'll find the same 3 vectors, ARs or Spaz 12s. The more levels you progress, the more guns you discover and unlock for later missions for you to use, but the experience can still feel kind of one-note after some time. The AI does a lot of the same stuff they do in F.E.A.R, flanking you from different angles whenever possible, throwing a grenade to wherever you're hiding, tossing flares, which I don't get why they do that occasionally, but also sometimes retreating when they're on their own. Not much of it becomes noticeable however if you move around as fast as you do in this game. They could only really get you in numbers. The horror elements that occasionally change things up I wasn't really invested into too much. Trepang 2 can set up a creepy atmospheric mood pretty well, but to have that final moment where the tension gets released be so lackluster thanks to a fight against glorified zombies or a monster boss fight that isn't fun is kinda unfortunate. Not all boss fights are bad though. The one against the Patriarch where you fight off the cultists was really nice and challenged me to make smarter use of my movement and slow-mo. Also that exact cult level at times looked super impressive, especially from a lighting standpoint. It's rare that I shut off the HUD entirely and try to play it like it's an E3 demo. While the campaign is super short, there are combat simulations and side missions that can add extra replayability. Side missions can range from basic elimination or hacking missions that don't stray away too far from the combat simulations, which are just wave-based survival on many different maps of the story. There's also a defending mission on a crash site that is extremely difficult, and that one oddball horror mission. I think Trepang 2 is a game you should only really buy if the gameplay really clicks for you. Luckily there's a demo which lets you play with a few guns and I think all mechanics the game has to offer. But there's also those simple arena style side missions you can do as an alternative. It's more than enough to come up with your first impressions. And look, even if I have my critiques, I can't be too harsh about it if the asking price for it is just a mere $20. There's much worse you can get for much more. SELACO is another F.E.A.R-inspired shooter running on G-Set Doom, which I think is a modern source put for the original Doom, with features that allow for more customization and easier accessibility for modern computers, and also probably the biggest platform for compatible Doom mods. Aside from maybe the weapon and enemy sprites, you wouldn't think it actually comes from a Doom source port due to how different it looks. But I'm slowly starting to learn that something like this isn't even abnormal. I can't speak on SELACO too much. All we got so far is a demo that the developers themselves are even starting to call outdated. But what I played from it impressed me so much that I still want to talk about it. Its gameplay also takes inspiration from F.E.A.R in terms of combat and AI, with level design being more in line with like a classic 90s shooter. Finding keycards to unlock new areas, or looking around for secrets that can grant you a new gun or some armor and ammo. Also finding so-called data pads around the map itself for world building, explaining the items you use or giving hints for unlockables, like for example keycard codes. There's also a lot of interaction with the environment, random stuff you can just pick up and throw, or eat and drink to heal up a tiny bit of HP, or even much cooler stuff the developer footage is showcasing, like strapping a turret onto a self-operating robot vacuum cleaner. SELACO is slated for an early access launch in May 2024. And I know what you're probably thinking about early access, but this seems to be a strong offering here. For example, 25 levels. If you've played the demo, you only played through 3. A total of 11 weapons so far, modding support and much more. If they manage to keep a mostly consistent level of quality throughout the full game, similar to how it is in the demo, then we're seriously looking at one of the best or most ambitious single player shooters in almost the last 2 decades. As of now, the demo is still available on Steam, but since the developer stated that the build is pretty outdated, it might get removed soon, so better get in while you can. I wasn't even sure if I could put Severed Steel alongside the other 3 titles, because with a dropkick, bullet time and vocal enemy callouts, that's where the similarities end. Severed Steel has the most liberating and fastest movement out of them all. You're a one-armed super soldier who cannot reload her weapon once it dries out, so you need to discard it for a new one. You can just quickly snatch it from enemies or kick it away from them. That is because the other arm is just a blaster. This poor lady turned into a Mega Man or Barrett Wallace cosplayer after she lost her arm at the beginning of the story for reasons. It becomes super handy when blasting through walls, which makes traversing quicker and allows for some real creativity in speedrunning levels. The game includes the usual shoot diving, bullet time, sliding, and puts all of that on steroids. You can also double jump and run on walls, which adds a strong parkour element into the mix. You can 360 flip your character in whatever direction you feel like mid-air, which is beneficial for quick turnarounds or to get behind someone charging at you with a riot shield, which is something I've never done in a video game but was super cool when I did it. You finish levels by just eliminating everyone or finishing an objective like destroying a certain object. Sounds simple, but the game can be at times a bit difficult. Just casually running and shooting will get you killed super quick. It doesn't take many hits for you to be taken out, especially with higher difficulties where you'll be on your deathbed in 1 to 3 shots. You absolutely have to make the most out of your movement, reaction time and precision to stay alive, since you also gain health back with every kill. It's usually the ones that are very wide and open where you don't exactly know from where you're getting shot at that are the difficult ones. But in turn there are levels that are so great that I occasionally went back and tried to go for the most perfect looking run possible. The gun variety is pretty strong, giving you all kinds of crazy shit to completely demolish a room. The game features a lot of unlocks like different blasters, starting weapons to equip, a myriad of gameplay modifiers that seriously shake things up. Like you got infinite ammo, low gravity, turning the floor into lava, or making all ammunition explosive. Or maybe you wanna play one in the chamber and put 1 round into every gun you pick up. With the AI moving faster than usual, I could go on all day. Content includes a short main campaign, Firefight, which is kind of an arcade score attack, and a roguelite inspired mode, Rogue Steel. And if that's still not enough for you, you can just start designing your own custom maps or download other people's maps via the workshop. Here's a map based on a lobby from the Matrix. Again, I cannot recommend Sabbath Steel enough, and if you're one of those people that just happened to pick it up while it was free on Epic, but never got around to playing it, if you have nothing to play, then treat yourself now. You won't regret it. Someone was probably wondering why it took me this long to mention this game. But yeah, the video game sequel to Hard Boiled that released in 2007, that John Woo was a part of, is the closest thing you will get to a John Woo video game. It's kinda interesting. We get video game adaptations of movies, or movie adaptations of video games. But a straight sequel to a film only accessible in video game form, an entirely different medium? I don't think I've ever seen that before. The game lets you blast your way through various locations like Hong Kong and Chicago. If I had to recite the plot for you, I'ma be very real and say that I didn't really pay much attention. Something about Tequila's family being kidnapped. Not only the triads but also the Ukrainian mafia is involved. But a lot of the dialogue and villains seem very cliché. I almost thought this guy was the Hong Kong Vin Diesel, and after all that I just decided to focus on the gameplay only. And the game makes a pretty strong first impression. Going from Max Payne 3 to this was a much needed relief. Where Max almost felt like moving a boulder, Tequila and Stranglehold in comparison is as light as a feather. Movement feels direct, you automatically slide over every table you accidentally walk into. You can shoot dive in this game too, either with or without slow-mo, and whenever you try to shoot dive while you're about to hit an obstacle, Tequila would just casually glide over it. The game has zero regard for believable movement. I mean hell, Tequila may take some time in slow-mo to fully turn around, but you can still get a kill if your reticle's on a hitbox and your left mouse button is being held. I'm not saying this is objectively better than realism. You can go either way and it more depends on the execution, I guess. But tell me that Tony Hawk pro skatering down a railing with double pistols isn't hard as fuck. Ah yeah, by the way, did you know you can ride a roll cart? What was only a set piece in Max Payne 3 is its own feature in this game. There's also a high level of interactivity with the environment. A lot of small objects and debris can be destroyed. The game has a quite honestly useless cover system where you can kick away tables to make use of them, but yeah, it's there. It is an interactable object. There's also a lot of street lights, explosive barrels, wooden planks, poles, piece of cover and so on, that you can all shoot away to kill enemies or create new pathways. They're often highlighted by a bright glint. Tequila has access to 4 different abilities that you recharge over time by collecting paper cranes. Those are Instant Heal, whenever you cannot find a med pack on the map, or Precision Time, which whips out a pistol and gives a long range insta-kill with a bullet cam. Then you have Barrage, which is a kind of rage mode where your ammo becomes endless, you shoot quicker and become invincible. And a spin attack that eliminates everybody in your area without any effort. These abilities come into good use once the game throws a lot of enemies onto you or during a boss fight. But I think that's all the game can do to create any sort of difficulty. The AI itself is pretty dumb, so you either get a lot of bullets coming your way or you're dealing with a boss fight that's just complete BS. I'm also not a fan of those regular standoffs the game does. While on paper a pretty neat idea, which looks like something out of the Replacement Killers, which Chang would choreograph the action sequences for, in execution they're kinda awkward. Often when you switch to the next enemy, the reticle isn't in the center, so you have to look where it is before you fire. And sometimes the direction of the bullet is a bit difficult to make out, so you don't know if you need to evade to the left or right. Regardless, Stranglehold still perfectly translates the feel of your average John Woo shootout in video game form.
Stranglehold really allows the player to play a John Woo movie, and all the elements that you see in the movie are what we want to make present in the game. So slow-mo obviously is a key to it, but the massive destructibility that you see in all of John Woo's movies, as the big battles are happening, everything's exploding around you, is that we really want to make you feel like you're part of that experience. He'll be sliding down banisters, sliding across tables, diving on roll carts, and taking out people as he's steering through this crowded environment. All those special stunts that he can do while he's still in the gunfight is a huge part of it. And a big goal of ours is to keep smooth flowing gunplay. That means no matter what you're doing, all the interactions, diving from the chandelier or sliding down a banister, all the time you can be shooting at the same time. So it's really important for us to get that smooth flowing gameplay.
John was very strongly involved with the project according to Brian Eddy, who was the producer for Stranglehold. John Woo has been amazing to work with. He has contributed a lot of animation and cinema direction, and has been extremely involved in the writing of the story. We are trying to recreate his cinematic vision in the game, so we regularly meet with him to review the latest version of Stranglehold and get his feedback, which is always insightful. Even when it comes to areas he's not very involved in, like gameplay design, he still often has a comment that adds to that aspect of the game, like how an animation could be done that would make a special move in the game more dramatic. He also makes a cameo inside the game.
What can I get you? Interesting decision.
Aside from Sam Peckinpah and his experience in martial arts and wuxia films, he also takes a lot of inspiration from musicals when it comes to his action. He's especially a big fan of jazz, stating Miles Davis as one of his greatest inspirations and making Tequila not also a cop but also a jazz musician in the movie. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because Stranglehold has a whole section in the 3rd chapter where a bunch of gangsters pop out of nowhere, and while a shootout ensues, the jazz band that's been sitting in the background is being told to keep playing. And I think this might be a representation of what sometimes runs through John Woo's mind when he's thinking of an action scene.
Who told you to stop playing?
I was so crazy about a musical. I learned so much, and I got so much inspiration from the musical. So when I am choreographing the action sequence, I feel like I'm making a dancing scene.
Stranglehold was done with a lot of passion and heart, and what it would have needed is some serious polish that would result from a bigger team and resources, especially in the PC department. The menus are awkward to control, the initial FOV without mods is super low, and I think the game had no widescreen support, so some fixes would be essential to install first before playing. The game is as cheap as dirt to pick up, however, and I can recommend it if you're looking for something to fill the void that Max Payne's absence so far has left. It can get pretty repetitive admittedly, but the movement, destruction and minor platforming elements make the experience still worth it. Hong Kong Massacre is a top-down shooter developed by a two-man team called VRESKIS. VRESKIS? I don't know. The gameplay of Hong Kong Massacre can be kinda intense at first, because it takes only one bullet for you to be taken out. So figuring out a route, remembering spawn placements, watching your ammo count and bringing lightning fast reaction times to the table, it's important to get that clean run without getting hit. And once you achieve that perfect run, you almost feel like John Wick yourself. And since we're talking about him, remember this scene in John Wick 4? Where the camera slowly pans away and goes in this top-down view? Yeah, it was inspired by this game.
The Dragon's Breath scene, there's this amazing tracking overhead shot, and it really reminded me of a game called Hotline Miami. I wondered if either of you two were familiar with this.
I haven't played it. No, I don't. There was a game we saw that was kind of influential. It was called Hong Kong Massacre, but we had seen just some of that and kind of started like, oh, that's a really interesting artistic way of doing it. So that was an influence for sure.
Before any level starts, you get to choose between 4 different weapons that you can also upgrade with stars. Stars that you earn for mission completions and extra side objectives. The structure is pretty simple, a set of levels to complete including one tough boss fight at the end with some story bits in between. The game is pretty nice to look at, the way certain objects get destroyed, smoke effects, or the muzzle flash looks impressive and clearly communicates where you're being shot at. And the shootout here looks also super cool. But I think Hong Kong Massacre for me left a little to be desired. The thing is, I don't know exactly what is missing. I know that the levels feel a little too similar at some point. The boss fights are intense as hell, which I like, but every time I end up stuck on something, it's the most frustrating way to die. I personally find it hard to pay attention to when an enemy is firing, how fast his bullets travel and when to dodge, finding a quick opening to get some hits, watching out for the other AI that hopefully doesn't take me out, while making sure I don't run into random boxes or walls all at the same time. The game isn't straight up bad, but I definitely have my personal problems with it which hold back my enjoyment from it. You might enjoy it way more than I do, I know other people did. Hell, maybe you find it even addicting. Alright, let's wrap up the showcase with maximum action. While the game features many of the usual gun-through elements, shoot diving, slow-mo, explosions, debris flying around, you know the deal. What's interesting and unique here is how dual wielding works. You can double carry literally anything, like maybe holding an M60 in an RPG. Crazy combination, but it works. Maximum Action features a stupidly large variety of guns in general. MP5s, AA-12s, old spaghetti western style revolvers, Uzis, repeaters, or hell even a katana you can combine. Gun battles are chaotic and over the top, and come along with a nice looking dismemberment system which is also kinda goofy with these blocky looking characters. The game has a strong 80s and 90s VHS action movie aesthetic. From the menus, including one of the coolest level selectors I've seen in a while, the loading screens, every level being presented as a scene from a movie production company that you named, and the Super Chang replay mode at the end of every level. And of course I noticed the obligatory hard-boiled references. I like the idea of a throwback to classic action cinema. I had some fun with the gameplay, but not necessarily for too long. The game is really short, kinda jank, and a lot of the guns just feel pretty weak to use. In terms of main levels, there isn't much on offer here, even if I do like how strong they vary each other in theme. You can be in the rainy streets of nighttime Hong Kong, or maybe in a jungle, end up fighting your way in a nightclub or slaughterhouse, infiltrate a secret base during the winter, and have the main campaign wrap up in a rooftop battle against a helicopter. The game also seems to bank a lot on its workshop support. There's a level editor right inside the game, which is cool. Like I played a GoldenEye level with some of its guns and stylistically it almost kinda fits. But this wouldn't have me stick around for too long. There's also the Antis mode, which is kind of like a wave-based survival mode that comes with its own levels. Aside from that, you also have the secret VHS tapes you can collect that give you some extra levels. It definitely helps with getting more out of your playtime. I think my main problem is just the overall gameplay and its polish. While frame rate issues, for me at least, have been mostly ironed out, I still experience random stutters or pauses, especially when loading, noticeable camera hitching whenever shoot diving. The game has been in early access for years now. I think there was a playable build that goes all the way back to 2018. Also the game leaving its old publisher New Blood because of apparently creative differences, which led to the developer deciding to self-publish the title, but unfortunately also losing the rights to the old soundtrack. I think $20 isn't a high asking price, but I probably should have waited until the game was finished and maybe at a bit of a discount. But hey, just like Hong Kong Massacre, maybe the game clicks with you. Alright, so I've now spent a long ass time talking about Wu-inspired shooters and could have mentioned even more that go into that style. Or talk about games from different genres that contain minor gun-through elements, intentionally or unintentionally. But what exactly is on the horizon for upcoming games in this genre? So we recently just got Trepang 2 a few months ago and I already spoke about SELACO, a packed early access launch slated for May 2024. There's also a PASO Elsewhere which came around a month ago, an indie shooter where you end up in some twisted reality and start off in a motel to fight monsters like vampires and werewolves. Its gameplay, neo-noir feel along with the setting reminds me a lot of Max Payne, and while I couldn't get to play it myself, it's something I need to catch up on. The game has been getting some pretty positive reviews so far. I don't know, maybe I'll make a part 2 or something. So it's been known for a while that Remedy is working, in collaboration with Rockstar, on complete remakes of Max Payne 1 and 2, combined together as one title this time, with Remedy handling the development and Rockstar providing financing. There's been a few development updates over the last year. In October 2023, the project entered the stage of product readiness, meaning the conceptual stage is done, gameplay, scope and style has been finalized, and from the time of this recording, early December, The game should enter full production in about 3 months. That's at least according to the development infographic, which if they stick to those estimated time periods, we will probably see something from the remakes in about 3 years. But game development can be unpredictable, and I expect Rockstar to not show anything before GTA 6 is out, so it doesn't sit in the shadow of the biggest upcoming game of all time. Again. The previously mentioned dev studio VRESKIS, I still don't know how to pronounce their name, who worked on the Hong Kong Massacre, are already busy with their next title, which is a first-person shooter this time, and their early footage looks beautiful so far. The highly stylized lighting and colors, the debris and muzzle flash and slow-mo, the movement, animations, everything seems to display that heroic bloodshed style as close as possible. It's gonna be a few years away until we see something more substantial, but I'll be closely following this title. I like what I'm seeing so far. Out of Action is a gun-fu PvP title planned for holiday 2024, with a futuristic art style inspired by 90s anime. The game earned a lot of traction earlier this year, and the developer Doku Games is posting a ton of clips on their YouTube and Twitter on a regular basis, showcasing weapons, animations, gadgets, movement, and so many other features. It honestly seems like a lot, to the point that I'm kind of worried that the game will suffer from feature creeping, but they're planning to release a demo at some point to try out, so until then I have to see if my concerns are even valid or not. But regardless, a lot of the gameplay clips do look exciting, and I'm also glad that an offline bot mode is being worked on. The stylized look makes me wonder what the lore behind this world is gonna be. There isn't much known other than the playable soldiers being called shells, being part synthetic and part human, a mega corporation that dabbles in human organ harvesting, and a terrorist organization trying to take it down. A super basic outline so far, but I'm intrigued. A proper campaign mode is being considered for some time after launch, which would be amazing if that ever came to fruition. The John Wick IP is finally getting its own big budget video game. It's currently in super early development. Other than being a AAA title, that's all we know. Not even who's the developer or publisher. It's a bit hard to imagine how a John Wick game could look like. Yes, I know we had the strategy game John Wick Hex in 2019, and now this is Alan Wick, not John Wick. But something that tries to adapt John Wick's style of gun-fu as close as possible in gameplay won't be easy. It's one thing to have something that looks like the films, but it's also important to make it feel as refined as it possibly can. The shooting could take some cues from Max Payne, I guess, but what about melee combat? People came up with all kind of different developers for this title. Remedy, Rockstar, even Naughty Dog. But the thing is, none of them have a super strong track record when it comes to melee combat. I'm imagining something that's on the level of what Slowclap did with Sifu, but if they're looking for the best of the best, then I guess a character action game developer like Platinum. But not even in 1,000 different timelines can I imagine Platinum getting a hold of the John Wick license. But I don't know, Vanquish was kind of fire, and Metal Gear Rising 2, and the Bayonetta series. I don't know if I'm cooking here, or if I'm about to get cooked. Listen, whoever's gonna be behind this has only one shot to get this right. It's gonna be one hell of an assignment. This is what we got so far, and while a bunch of these games are still a few years away, if they turn out to be successful, it's possible to see more games in the style further down the line, but hopefully not to the point of oversaturation. The gun-fu, gun-kata, bullet ballet, whatever subgenre of shooters people call them, isn't nearly as established as other shooter subgenres. After seeing Trepang 2's launch and the other games that are lining up in the coming years, I wanted to make this video as a general guide on games inspired by John Woo's work. Some of their common traits and inspirations, highlighting some differences, and showcasing some of its best representations of the genre. There is no gaming version for this type of video currently. Accented Cinema did 2 of these for the movie industry, and while Flix also got some great videos mostly covering John's greatest hits, better than I could. I also just love these type of games and wanted to track down its origins more thoroughly. I want to see gun-fu shooters succeed in the future and get the limelight more often. It wasn't rare that I saw comments that went something like, "What do you call games like this? Are there any similar ones? Why don't they make any more games like this?" And almost all of them are called underrated and not too often talked about. So I decided to congregate most of them into this one video. And with the state of the John Wick franchise, its combat montages in video games that are inspired by it that get a stupid amount of views, I just thought to myself that there has to be a market for this. Just a bit more clarification maybe. But what is most important is that I got to recommend some classic action films and video games to you. Hopefully it worked. A huge thank you for watching until the very end. I absolutely loved diving deep into this topic, but this video was pretty exhausting and felt like forever to finish. It was my longest video yet, and there was a ridiculous amount of research I had to put into. I appreciate any feedback, corrections, or interesting trivia someone would like to share. Everything that I could find, whether it's interviews, director commentary, and so on, I'll be sharing it in the description if you want to learn more about it. There's a decent bit of extra trivia that I couldn't fit into this video. Thank you to anyone who engages with this video in some type of way, whether it's liking, subscribing, commenting, or sharing the video around. It means the world to me. I'm already sitting on a ton of new ideas for my next video, but they're not nearly as big as this one. This one definitely set a benchmark for me, but now I need to chill. At least for a bit. My voice is getting hoarse.